Good afternoon from South Africa, and good evening and good morning to the many others joining from around the world. Thank you all for joining this 28th webinar hosted by the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. My name is Zeni Thambadu, and I am the Deputy Director of the National Association of Childcare Workers in South Africa. I am the Vice Chairperson of the Professional Board for Child and Youth Care, and I'm also your moderator for today's webinar as a member of the Global Social Service Alliance Steering Committee for the last 6 years. In this webinar today, we will present and discuss a unique statutory council for social service professions in the South African context. Everyone is muted, but you can type your questions in the chat box throughout the presentations, and then I will pose your questions to the speakers following all the presentations. The full recording of this webinar will be available afterwards on the Alliance website and the YouTube channel. We will also share summary and the full presentations. We are really excited to have 125 people from around the globe who have joined us today. It is my pleasure now to introduce you to our first speaker. Mrs. Langi Malamba is the Registrar of the South African Council on Social Service Professions in South Africa. Langi is a social worker with 29 years of experience in different social work settings. Langi has served as a Registrar of the South African Council for more than 3 years. She holds a master's degree in management and is working towards an MBA. She also serves as a chairperson of the National Network on Violence Against Women. Thank you, and over to you, Langi.
Thank you, Zeni. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody. I want to start first with the history of why the South African Council for Social Service Professions was established. Around 1994, South Africa was liberated from apartheid and work began on creating a just society. 1996, there was a first white paper on social welfare, which was published after extensive consultation with all stakeholders. And the outcome of it was the establishment of an integrated social service profession sector. It addressed the HR capacity, the social workforce in the country, and looked at how to transform the social service context. In 1998, the Social Work Act was amended to become the Social Service Professions Act. Throughout the history of council, there's been a 5-year tenure in between councils, with the first one established in 1998, 2004, as you can see on the slides. The responsibility for the first council was to create an integrated setting up the first professional board for child and for social work, and it coordinated and regulated the social service professions then. The next 5 years was the second tenure for the second council, which we saw the establishment of the child and youth care work in 2000 and 2009. The third council for another 5 years looked at establishing and professionalizing the child and youth care work. For the first time, legislation was put in place in terms of regulation to ensure that child and youth care workers can be registered and recognized as a growing profession. The current council, which is the fourth, with the 5-year tenure up to 2021, is in place currently with the two respective child and youth care work board and social work board. On the next page, you will see the slide talks about the constitution of council. In the same way we have the constitution of the board, there's always 6 members of the respective profession, together with other professionals as well within the social service profession setting. And the minister always appoints people to enhance the work of the council. We are also looking at expanding representation of the council by having another emerging board, which is for community development practice. We will now look at the vision of council, which is a very powerful vision that the fourth council has set for itself to be a social service, practitioner working or united in excellence. The Council has envisioned all social service practitioners united in service excellence. And this is a powerful vision that binds together the workings of all the service practitioners. The mission is to serve the best interests of the social service practitioners first, the professions, the service users, and promote the social service professions in an innovative and responsive manner. And I think to a large extent, Council has managed to actually live by its vision and mission to bring together the social service practitioners. Next, we will see the structure briefly. We have the overarching structure, which is the council, with a minimum of 94 people. And we've got the respective boards. We've got an executive committee, which meets in between meetings of council. And we've got respective committees, as well as the two important committees regulating the profession, the Committee for Preliminary Inquiry and the Professional Conduct Committee. And of course, we've got the register together with the Secretariat, also giving support to the overall structure of council. On the next slide, you will see a summary of the Section 10 committees. Each of them has got various roles to play, and each of them has got a charter which guides how they work individually, but also how they work integrated to make sure that the strategic objectives of council are attained. Excuse me. The purpose and role of council is to regulate the professions for which a professional board has been established, and the mandates are very clear. The first mandate is for registration. The Office of the Registrar is tasked with keeping registers of all people who are fit and proper to practice. The second mandate is education, training and development, which sets norms and standards for quality provision of education for the professions within the scope of practice of the board. Professional conduct, we monitor compliance to the set of ethical codes which are prescribed in the Act. And of course, Council is tasked with supporting the professionalization of any emerging occupation as designated by the Ministry. On the next slide, you will see the existing designations that we have for social work as well as child and youth care work. And the third designation for community development is underway. The South African Qualifications Authority is responsible for accrediting professional bodies according to the designation. So we are currently designated for social work, child and youth care work. The next slide, we focus on sustainability. The Social Service Professions Act number 110 of 1978 mandates council to raise funds through subscription, collection of subscriptions from all practitioners, through fines imposed and recovered in terms of the Act, funds appropriated by Parliament for assisting council to achieve its objectives, funds obtained by way of loans raised with the approval of the Minister, any monies accrued to council from any other source. On the next slide, just to highlight compliance and also how many social workers, child and youth care workers we have currently registered. As a council, we have fostered a sound working relationship with the employer. We conduct periodic verifications of status and employer audits. Where possible, we join the department in doing their own audits, or we get invited to come and verify the status of people working for various employers, and we take our mobile unit to do the on-site registration. There's also ongoing communication with the sector to keep their registrations up to date. As you can see on the slides, we have since 2016 to now, there's an increase from social auxiliary workers. In 2016, we had 8,330. Currently, we've got 10,800. So there's an increase of about 205. And as in social work, we've got about 31,000 now compared to 23,000 in 2016. And the total registrants on our registers for child and youth care, social work, the different student categories, is about 71,000 all in all. Thank you.
Thank you, Langi. Thank you for your valuable input on the structure of the South African Council for Social Service Professions. I would like now to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Mary Kruger is a chairperson of the Professional Board for Social Work in South Africa. The social worker with 36 years of experience, Marie is a private practitioner specializing in adoptions and therapy for children and families. She has served as chairperson of the Professional Board for Social Work for the last 2 years and also as an executive board member of the South African Association for Social Workers in Private Practice. She holds a PhD in social work. Over to you, Marie.
Thank you, Zeni. Good day, everybody. I'll stay on the safe side to say good day instead of good morning or good evening. It's an honor to be part of this webinar and to present to you the work and doings of the Professional Board for Social Work. The Professional Board the composition is consisting of between 9 and 12 members. The majority of the members, 80% of them, is members from the profession concerned, which is in this, and for social work it will be social workers, and for the other board, child and youth care, it will be in that field. It also represents person representing the community, relevant education and training institutions, a legal expert, and a council representative with the relevant sector expertise. Currently, we have 2 professional boards, which would be the Board for Social Work and the Board for Child and Youth Care. You can see some or not all of the members are present on the pictures that you can see, but most of them are there. For the Board for Social Work, we have the 2 different committees. It's the Education, Training and Development Committee and then the Professional Conduct Committee, which is also the same for Child and Youth Care Board. The task teams under the Social Work Board is for specializations, international qualifications, that is where people qualified in a different country and want to come and work in South Africa, ecometrics, which is the assessments, continuing professional development, standard setting. You cannot measure something unless you have a specific set of norms and standards, which is a detailed document that we're developing. And then, of course, ethics is always part of it. For the Board for Child and Youth Care work, their task teams currently is the continued professional development, the norms and standards, ethics, and then the learning material, which the chairperson will elaborate on later. The overview of the professional boards. The mandate basically of the professional boards is to determine the minimum standards for education and training of the profession within its scope of practice, maintenance and enhancement of the dignity and the integrity of the profession falling within our scope ambit, the guidance of the profession falling within its scope to protect the public, and communication to the minister on matters of public importance. On the next slide will be the board functions. The professional board are mandated by the Social Service Professions Act to approve training schools subject to prescribed conditions and to determine minimum standards for education and training of the profession within its scope of practice, including the continuous professional education of persons practicing the profession. We also promote liaison and cooperation with training institutions in the field of training as contemplated and regulated, and promotion of standards for such training. We appoint moderators and examiners, conduct examination and grant certificates, and charge the prescribed fee in respect of such examinations. And then to promote the development of specializations and postgraduate qualifications. Currently, we have 7 areas of specialization, which is basically adoption, clinical social work, forensic social work, occupational social work, school social work in healthcare, and social work supervision. There are two more in line to be finalized and then also to be registered as areas of specialization. The uniqueness work together. The following strategic objectives are key to the synergy and concord between the two boards, which translates to improve engagements and appreciations for each other within the sector. We ensure that the SACSSP operates in an integrated, unified and supportive manner with all its components, which is the council, the two boards and administration. Promote innovative indigenous methods of multidisciplinary practice. The boards championed the integrated case management transformation agenda with Council in partnership with UNICEF and Department of Social Development. Key issues that's faced by the Professional Board for Social Work is salary disparities affecting the practitioners, where government is paid more than the non-government organizations, inconsistent payment of subsidies to the NGOs, which then affect their service delivery, poor working conditions of social workers, practitioners, a forcing breach of contract of trained cadres from the NGO sector by government departments. What happens there is that students will obtain a bursary from Department Social Development, but when they complete their studies, there's no employment available for them at the Department Social Development. They then find employment in the NGO sector, which is the non-government organizations. They train them in-service training, train them to render the services for that specific agency, and then all of a sudden the department will come and say, okay, we've got a position for you now, you have to start within 2 days, and that then forced the breach of contract with the NGO. Unprofessional conduct due to the employer abdication of responsibility and the breach of confidentiality, the reporting lines, especially where the practitioner is working in another field, say for instance health or justice, and then of course the perils of social media. How do we deal with the issues at the Board for Social Work? Advocacy and lobbying is an important part of our role. We're developing an employer code of good practice for employers, which will be exciting. We currently review the policies, all the policies, to make them relevant to deal with real-time challenges faced by practitioners. Example for the use of social media and the advantages of using technology. We also dialogue with relevant employers and monitoring for compliance. Ethics training for practitioners, and ongoing communication with the sector. And lastly, the achievements of the board is we revised the scope of practice for social workers to make it more detailed and give a clearer picture of what we are there for. We have a close working relationship with ASASWA, which is the Association of South African Schools of Social Work, on training of social workers, quality assurance, fit and proper student screening, oath-taking ceremonies, student placement for work integrated learning. We're revising the 7 areas of specialization that I've mentioned before, and they are going for public comments within the sector. We're reviewing and consultation with employers and practitioners on the Code of Good Practice for employers, as well as the Code of Ethics for practitioners. And we're also reviewing the Continuous Professional Development Policy, the International Qualification and Registration Policy, and the applicants for the Fit and Proper Practitioner, which will be our Fit and Proper Policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie, for providing us with information on the functioning of the professional boards and the Professional Board for Social Work in particular. It is my pleasure now to introduce our final speaker, Ms. Madiba is the chairperson of the Professional Board for Child and Youth Care Work. Practicing as an organizational development consultant for over 12 years, Aziwe has supported 7 PEPFAR partners in strategic management through training and building the capacity of the partner organizations boards for improved governance. She has also established monitoring and evaluation systems. South African government has appointed Aziwe as chairperson of the child for children and a champion for children and the child and youth care profession in her position as chairperson of the Professional Board for Child and Youth Care Work. Aziwe, it is my pleasure to introduce you and give you the opportunity to share the last presentation.
Thank you, Zini. Greetings from a sunny South Africa. Next slide, please. So I'd like to just share with you the journey of registration of the child and youth care sector. The first step was really about convincing the social work establishment of the value of the child and youth care profession. And this was really about differentiating what's the uniqueness of the child and youth care. When we're talking child and youth care workers, what's unique about it? And we had to go to some benchmarking where we had to look at the child and youth care has got quite a wealth of knowledge written around it, which is very unique to the sector. And therefore, in looking at that, and also it has been established, I mean, there's quite a lot of an international reach with Canada leading in relation to the actual child and youth care sector. So in convincing, it took us 9 years for the board before the actual regulations were passed for the regulations of the child and youth care sector. And some of this was also about continuously saying, this is why we need to exist. And we needed to prove ourselves as a board. But more than that, being a new board, it was important. There was a lot of forming that was happening at the same time. There was a process required where the championing from an organized sector. And this was about having a professional association with the National Association of Child and Youth Care Workers. They were able to be that champion within the sector. Then there was a development through other structures of national curriculum for the provision of training and education and auxiliary and professional level of the child and youth care workers. And then the maintaining of the interest and commitment of the sector to the regulation process. Now, this meant that we had to have a constant presence in the sector. We had to do quite a lot of road shows. We had to continuously be engaging through the social media. Next slide, please. Now, some of the key issues that were faced by the Professional Board for Child and Youth Care was limitation within government employment structures of the employment opportunities for child and youth care workers. There are still some salary disparities between government and the NGO workers. The employer non-compliance with the requirements of the legislation on the mandatory of registration, where we've continuously have to remind people you've got to register on an annual basis, and ensuring that new appointments are registered practitioners. Now, what has happened, because people had been practicing for a while, now we're saying whoever gets recruited has to be registered as a professional. Next slide, please. Some of the issues were also not having enough child and youth care workers at professional level to assume management and supervisory posts. And this is mainly because the sector is growing. At the moment, we've got quite a big base of practitioners who are at auxiliary level. And therefore, there's a need for us to continuously be developing our practitioners to make sure that they are now able to take on the supervision and the management post. and the inconsistent payment of stipend and subsidies by government to NGO who employs child and youth care workers. Now, this has been a key point for us to do some advocacy as the board, where we are continuously engaging with government to make sure that there's consistency that is developing. If we're saying this is a profession, then there can't be breaks in payment of stipends or even the subsidies. And the lack of access to higher education to improve the employability of cadres at auxiliary level and create sufficient professional level workers. Now, we've been involved in engagement with a few universities. Currently, we've got 2 universities that are providing the qualification where the child and youth care workers can go to, and that is a private university, Monash, and a public university, Durban University. But we've had quite a lot of engagement with the University of Western Cape, where they are now pioneering we are about pioneering a degree which would then be a long distance and then can be duplicated by other universities. So there's really amazing work that's happening there with the University of Western Cape. Next slide, please. Now, let's get to some of the achievements of the Professional Board for Child and Youth Care. There was, the minute the promulgation of the regulation was announced, there was an overwhelming positive response to the regulation requirements. And within a space of 6 months, we had over 7,000 voluntary registrants. Then we've also been engaged in the publication of the amendment of the regulations to allow for a broader definition of the professional level. As indicated earlier on, the board is now represented on the University Working Group to fast track a distance learning degree offered for child and youth care. And that's the one I'd mentioned earlier with the University of Western Cape. And obviously we've got the University of South Africa, where we are also hoping that, because they're also involved with distance learning, so that we can have as wide availability for our child and youth care workers. And also the development of the continuous professional development policy, which is now ready for publication. That has been quite a dynamic process that we've been involved in. Now it's ready for publication and consultation. Next slide, please. The development of Code of Ethics, well, that has happened, and we've now got a booklet that we want to put out, and we've got the most amazing video, animated and quite engaging when you watch it. And the review of learning material for auxiliary level training offered nationally, that's been a process, ongoing process, where we're engaging with the developers to make sure that the board makes sure that there's a form of standardization and that there's integrity in the material that is being developed, but also expertise within the sector, that it's the people with expertise that are developing the material. The informational roadshows to connect with the constituency, that often gives us a nice opportunity to see where exactly is our constituency and where do we need to put the emphasis as the board. There's been a registration drive to encourage child and youth care workers to value their license to practice. And in relation to that, there's been quite a lot of excitement where practitioners are putting up their certificates, and there's almost like a challenge between the practitioner to say, where is your certificate? And the initiation of an advocacy process with government to ensure better employment opportunities and working conditions. Next slide, please. And just to end with a quote from Nelson Mandela. If enough people were touched and imbued by the spirit of caring, it could in time change the whole landscape of how children are treated in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all our presenters for sharing with us the important role that Council can play in professionalization of child and youth care work and social work. We will now open the session for discussion. Please use the chat window to type in any question or comments for the presenters, and we will present them and hopefully have a vibrant and engaging conversation. We already have one question that's been put out for us to look at. The question is, please give me more information on the role of CPD points for professionals who are not currently in a social work or social service work related job. So I think the question is about CPD points, but it might have a little leaning towards RPL as well. So I leave it to the registrar and others to respond.
Okay, I'll go first. Dr. Kruger will add. I think what is critical with continuous professional development is for an individual to identify suitable courses or training that they want to subscribe to. So even if a course is being designed for social workers, let's say it's something not specific to social work, maybe minute taking, report writing, and so forth. Somebody outside of the sector would be allowed to participate if they so wish. However, we do have specific training which would be geared only to social workers or child and youth care workers, in which case the practitioners will have to register with council to prove that they've actually been upgrading themselves, they've been exposing themselves to new learnings and new ways of doing things in their line of duty. So it is not just a standalone training that you acquire, but it's more used to enhance your ability to be more effective in your work. So as we encourage our practitioners to go on CPD training, we actually linking it to their professional development so that we know where the gap areas are, but we also monitor it through linkages with registration. So if you don't acquire enough points, we are worried because we know that this person is left behind. Technology has advanced, social ills have changed. Therefore, somebody needs to keep abreast of the changes in their environment to be able to navigate and also be useful in terms of their interventions.
Thank you very much,
us,
Langi. Is there somebody else who
thanks.
wants to respond as well?
Thanks, Zeni. I'll also respond. I think the purpose of continuous professional development is exactly what it says. Things change so much in a profession and there's so much developments going on. So if you've qualified 10, 15, 20 or 30 years longer, you cannot expect to practice the profession responsibly and be accountable for your actions if you don't ensure that you are updated with current developments and what's happening. So we are encouraging service providers to present courses that can focus on a specific area, say for instance in play therapy with children. These courses that they present in either a form of a small group discussion or a workshop or a seminar, the course content is then submitted to the board that serves before the CPD panel, that we look at the content of the course, if it actually provides continuous professional development or if it's just information. This is then registered and allocated to specific points, say for instance 4 points per day. The different practitioners, their responsibility is then not to go point hunting just to make up the 20 to 25 points per annum that is required for the next registration, but to look which programs and workshops and courses are presented that I'm interested in and will actually enhance my professionalism. And that is the courses they then attend. They then have to keep a portfolio of evidence of the courses they've attended with the certificate. Every service provider have to issue a certificate of attendance with the points indicated on there. That is then kept into the portfolio of evidence of each practitioner, and that is then randomly requested for checkups if they actually adhere to the CPD guidelines.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comprehensive response as well. Marie, there's another question for you. They say that it's interesting to note that the board is developing the Board for Social Worker Code for Good Practice for employers. My question is, one, to what extent will this code include...
The question is?
Can you hear me? The question is, to what extent will the code include the safety issues with regards to how working conditions of social workers? And how will the board monitor the implementation of the suggested code for employers? Would you like me to repeat that?
No, it's okay. I think it's you can just fill in where I've missed it. We're trying to develop this code of conduct for employers to be as thorough as possible and to include specific issues such as safety, such as working conditions. And the way that it will be monitored is that, obviously we busy consulting now and consulting with the different employers and get the input to make it as detailed as possible. But the result will then be, when this is approved and gazetted and it's made a policy, that where the employers do not adhere to the requirements, it can be reported to us as unprofessional conduct, and we will then deal with it as in a way that we normally deal with unprofessional conduct.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. I have another question here for the registrar. Can you please explain the Section 10 committees? Langi, this one for you. Hello?
Okay. About the Section 10 committees, so each council in their 5-year tenure will decide on which committees they want to form. The Act in the Section 10 of the regulations will actually, in the formulation of committees will explain, for example, that you need an oversight structure, your risk and audit committee, you need a human resource and remunerations committee, you need your finance committees. Those are the primary committees that you need. However, the council is at liberty to choose if they want a communications committee, for example, if they want to have a committee for business re-engineering. So depending on the need of each council, the committees can increase or they could be decreased. So currently with the 4th council, they have increased the number of committees. There's the Education, Training and Development Committee, which is an advisory committee that looks at higher level education issues. They look at legislative frameworks, because these people who sit on that committee have been appointed by the ministerial process, where the minister says, we want also training institutions to sit on council. We want the legal person to sit on council. Therefore, the education, training and development becomes very important to guide the processes of council in terms of developing norms and standards, criteria, monitoring relationships with institutions of higher learning or even the further education and training colleges. We also have a new committee that was only developed this year, the communication, the re-engineering committee, which looks at the infrastructural development within council, whether it's the building, the offices, the IT infrastructure. The IT and business re-engineering looks at that. We have a transformation committee, which is a very important part. It's almost the heartbeat of council in terms of relevance and responsiveness. So transformation will champion projects, for example, the integrated case management project. It's something that was initiated by the work of the transformation committee. It looks at the nationwide issues and integrate them into the work of the different committees or the different boards of council. Say, in the country, this and this is the problem, and this is how we can collectively deal with it. So committees, section 10 is because of a particular clause in the act. That's why they call section 10.
Thank you. Thank you, Langi. This one is for childcare for Aziwe. How has incorporating the Child and Youth Care Board into the Council impacted the child and youth care profession in South Africa? For instance, how has licensing changed the day-to-day experience of child and youth care workers?
I think as a first step, there's a pride in being registered. They're now, the child and youth care workers are seeing themselves as professional practitioners. The second step would be about making sure that if we look at the code of ethics, that they're being held accountable, that they know that they're not just going to be practicing as they were doing, but now they have a code of ethics that they need to be abiding by. And with the board, as we also mentioned earlier on, is that we're now consciously trying to make sure that there's opportunities for them to develop their practice. The acknowledgement, that acknowledgement, because a lot of them have been at the auxiliary level. Now it's about saying, how do we make sure that you're moving up and having more people that are actually getting into the university system, getting a solid knowledge base to make sure that they're now getting some recognition also within their peers, within the social service social services. For example, with the social workers, there's now an acknowledgement that yes, this sector is professional. I mean, that's the key thing. I don't know whether you want to add, Zeni.
No, I think that's great. That's a great response. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Another question here on CPD points, which is interesting. Will CPD points be cross-professional? In other words, can I, as a child and youth care worker, gain points by attending learning from social work? So I think this is open to all three speakers. Anyone can answer this.
I'll kick off with it to say yes, I think that is the direction we are working towards. Currently, for instance, it's not only social workers presenting the CPD activities. We can also, sometimes it's a psychologist, but if it's in your field and relating to your scope of practice, that's where the relevance comes in. So I think the key will be what is in your scope of practice, and if it's then a different professional presenting the course, you need to find a way to work out and to motivate how is it relevant for you to attend that. But it can definitely be across all the different professions and practitioners.
May I add?
Yes, please do.
There are instances where, for example, we're advocating now for integrated case management. So when a course will be offered on how to report, it is generic to all practitioners. So a child and youth care worker can come on board, community development practitioners can come on board, and equally they would be given the same CPD points. So as we work towards making sure that the whole social service practice field is strengthened, we will be encouraging such cross-pollination of information, rubbing off on each other in terms of experience, sharing best practice to happen across the field.
Great. I think this question for you, Langi, as well, in terms of being a statutory body, what role is government playing within council other than funding? Langi?
Okay, yes. Apart from funding, the department, not only social development, we work very closely with social development, However, the work of social service practitioners cuts across different government departments. And I'll give you an example. Placement of child and youth care workers in education institutions, in your ECDs, in the primary school settings, for both child and youth care workers, social workers, community development practitioners, there is a need to be spread across different government departments. So currently, the major link and benefit of working with government is around policy development. Council is regarded as one of the key role players or strategic partners where we have to influence through input, dialogues on policy development. Currently, we've championed the process of reviewing the Social Service Professions Act. The bill has been reviewed and council has been instrumental. The board, both the board child and youth care work and social work have been part of this process from inception to make sure that we dialogue with our own interest groups to ensure that their comments are integrated in the final document. So currently, when there's opportunities to give inputs on any legislation that is, gazetted, council plays an important role to give input to government, but government also looks out to us to say, council, can you please give us your input? There's a deadline, give us input by such and such a date. And we make sure to communicate within our circle to make sure that we take advantage of that, because this is the only statutory council for social service professionals in the country.
Hey, well, thank you for that. Here's another question about the uniqueness of the childcare profession. So they're saying, can you say something about the uniqueness of child and youth care? How is it different from social work? How were you able to convince social work board that you were a related but distinct profession? Would you like to take that on, Aziwe? Not getting a response? Can I just ask another question? What strategies does Council have to ensure that state facilities meet their regulatory requirement by ensuring that their staff get registered with Council? Would somebody like to take that one?
Please repeat, Mazeni.
What strategy does Council have to ensure that state facilities meet their regulatory requirements by ensuring that their staff get registered with Council? It's all about state facilities meeting the regulation requirement. What do we do?
I have said in my presentation that a very good relationship with the employer sector. There's still some challenges here and there, but we advocate for compliance and we make sure that we communicate in an ongoing fashion to remind the employer to keep their part of the bargain, even in the absence of a code of good practice. We have that understanding. Do the verifications to say, employer X, how many people are in your employ? Can you please give us their status? We verify on our end if they're in good standing, and if not, we highlight who is deregistered, and we make the employer aware that it is responsibility to hire only people who are registered. We also look at the kinds of advertisement that goes out, and we regularly give feedback and we hold employer responsible to say all adverts which are published looking for a social service practitioner must specify the compulsory registration with council. So where we find that employers abdicate responsibility, whether consciously or not, we engage with them politely to say, please retract that advert and issue it in this way. And we are engaging our Department of Public Service and Administration, which is the key department looking at employability of everybody in country, to say, let us align what you are doing and what the Act is prescribing. Because any falling in between the cracks puts our clients at risk. So our responsibility as a statutory council is to engage with the employer, engage with the state departments, who is the largest employer in the country, to make sure that all their practitioners are registered by the prescribed time. So we normally expect that by the 1st of December, annually, people start to pay their subscriptions. There's a period of grace up to the 31st of March each financial year. So we send out notices throughout the year to say it is that time where you have to now start paying your annual fee for the next year. And where people have forgotten, we remind them, but they know that there is a fine that they have to pay or a penalty that they have to pay. So that is, the strategy is ready to communicate ongoing, to leverage support of the employer, to make them aware of the benefits. And council has been very instrumental in bridging that gap between employer and the statutory council and its board.
Okay, thank you very much, Lange. Aziwe, are you there? Would you like to take that question about the uniqueness of the child and youth care profession? How did we manage to convince social work that we were a related but distinct profession? If I could just make a comment as the vice chairperson on that. I think that in discussion with social work, the professional board for child and youth care was able to clarify that child and youth care work demonstrated a unique scope of practice that included a strong theoretical base of knowledge that was unique for it and that was reflected in international literature. I think child and youth care practice, child and youth care workers as a distinct practitioner with its unique characteristics of child and youth care practice was also used in the discussions and the debates. I think that it is the professional association that played a very important part in organizing the child and youth care sector into, I think, a vibrant advocate for its recognition and for its growth and development as a unique profession. And so I think that we are firm believers that strong professional associations linked to different social service workers are very, very important for the organizing of the sector. There's a question here now on exploring safety issues further. What is the board's opinion about how this can be addressed, the issue of safety issues? Is anybody wanting to make another comment on that?
I think safety is a rather wide concept. We have to look at this, first of all, things like the environment in which the practitioners are expected to function, the buildings, if that is safety compliant or not. We have a situation with a government building in Johannesburg. It's more than 600 employees, but they're only allowed 40 at a time. So obviously, because of the safety issues of the building not being compliant, so that seriously impact on the functioning of the employers there. It also have to focus on safety in terms of going out into the field, home visits, the hours that you're working. So I really think it's very wide, and that is why we are gaining as much input from as much stakeholders and people as possible to be able to cover it all.
Thank you.
I would want to add, yes, may I add something around safety?
Yes. Yes.
And I think the issue of personal safety, more especially for practitioners who are working in secure care centers or homes for children or teenagers and all of that, there's a general fear that the work of a social worker, for example, predisposes one to that kind of danger where you are at risk if you're mediating between a couple and the other person feels, maybe things are not going their way, you are actually at risk. And I think those issues are very important for the employer. When we look at the code of good practice, it will look at things like that to say, when you're traveling, is it a car that is insured? Is your life insured as well? But if you're going into an unsafe or a danger zone, is there somebody accompanying you who will be able to drive in the event you have to come running? You know, if you're canceling clients, is there a one-way through mirror where people can see that you are still safe? You're canceling a couple with one emotions looking very flat. Is there a one-way mirror where you can see, you know, safety is now being encroached on, or you can press a panic button? So these issues are real issues which we need to look at, because lately we find that social workers are killed in the line of duty by clients. We find that child and youth care workers working in secure care homes are being violated by the children that they're supposed to be taking care of, or even physically violated. So it is a very important issue that we will be looking at as we engage with the employer sector about code of good practice and creating a permissive environment for people to be able to continue rendering effective and efficient services to their clients.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lange. I'm not too sure if we have any time for any further questions. There have been many questions that have not been answered. But I think just to say that one of the questions talks about what are the recruitment and retention strategies in place for social service practitioners. But I think this comes from one rather painful question here, is that what are we going to do about community child and youth care workers? How are we going to ensure that they are fully recognized with their rights within the profession? And how is council going to make sure that they actually have the conditions that are the best conditions for them to practice? I'm not too sure if we have any comment on that, because I don't think we have time. But just to say that the council and the board are taking the concerns of community child and youth care workers very seriously in their discussions and advocacy efforts. Because we are short for time, I think that I'm going to have to round up now and say a very big thank you to all our presenters for the lively discussion. And just a few reminders before we close the session. If you're interested in joining the Alliance and receiving notices about future webinars, please visit the socialserviceworkforce.organization to register. A summary of these presentations and a recording of this webinar will be available soon. And each of the past 27 webinars is available as well on the www.socialserviceworkforce.organization webinar if you want to click on to get that. We just want to round off by saying thank you very much for joining us, for your questions, for your interest in the South African Council for Social Service Professions, and the way South Africa has managed to merge two boards, child and youth care and social work, with the opportunity for community development to join in soon. Thank you very much for your interest and support from the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. Thank you.